So this morning we were doing that thing where we were starting off with an extraordinary example of what it is that we are going to be talking about, which is, of course, forgiveness. So this is one of those places where we get to see Jesus' ability to forgive on full display, as he not only forgives those who are persecuting him, but then has this really interesting exchange with the thieves crucified on either side of him. One of the reasons, well, there's a couple of reasons why already Jesus seems uniquely situated to offer the forgiveness that he does. First of all, he's Jesus. Kind of helps, right? So I remind us of that to lift this up as like, this is not the standard, right? Jesus does not give us the standard, and the standard is not to be Jesus. Otherwise, we'd all be in a lot of trouble, right? So we're going to talk about that more in a minute. But the other reason that I think Jesus is so uniquely placed to do what he does is he has been actively practicing forgiveness throughout his entire life and ministry unto this point. If you can see across everything that Jesus does over and over again, the teachings he offers, the people that he talks to, you can see him constantly practicing this idea of forgiveness. You can see over and over again in the places that he goes and the people that he talks to, right, that people do things that bother him, people do things to bother him and to try to attack him, and yet for some reason, he never seems to hang on to it. And when the disciples want to hang on to it, and the disciples want to take like revenge, or the disciples want to hold a grudge, we get one of the other famous passages in the Bible about forgiveness was when one of the disciples asks, Jesus, how many times should I forgive? As many as 7. And what does Jesus in turn reply? No, 70 times 7, which is Jesus' way of saying always. Right? When Jesus throws out those big numbers like that, he's not expecting you to keep count, right? Like I'm up to 140, I only got another few to go. No, he's saying it's supposed to be a practice, it's supposed to be a lifestyle, it's supposed to be the way that we approach everything is we are here to offer forgiveness. Now, will often forget and we get confused about what forgiveness means, especially the way that Jesus talks about it. So we're going to get to that in a minute. But I'm wondering, some of us have probably met people in our lives who for some reason and somehow just seemed to not be bothered by things, right? People who can endure all sorts of stuff and then somehow and in some way go, well, okay, and then just move on with life. I don't understand those people, and they really annoy me. I was reminded, so we're, part of what we're doing right now is a book study by an author that I know who actually called me into local church ministry. And we were going through that. I was actually reminded of a story of being there. So I started ministry in the local church in South Columbus. And those of you who are in the book study know that that was an interesting neighborhood to be in. It was in the south of Columbus, really kind of Rust Belt sort of area, all kinds of interesting people around and doing stuff. And not only was it already that, but I got the blessing of entering ministry in an economically disadvantaged area in the summer of 2008. What a time. And so if you don't remember, summer 2008 wasn't a great time in things like the economy. And throughout that summer and through the fall, as we saw people and the number of people participating in our Wednesday night meal, which is a free meal for the community, and our food pantry, like explode, like they grew by 10 times, like basically overnight. And we were swimming upstream trying to figure out how to make all of that work. Right, we were just starting to get our feet under us, right around January, February of that first year. And that's when I get a call at about 4 o'clock in the morning from the local police telling me that somebody had broken into our building. And they had taken a crowbar to a door that wasn't, frankly, all that secure. And they had gotten into our basement area. And they had stolen all of the sound equipment we used to do worship on Wednesday nights because we'd offer a little worship along with the free meal. They stole some of our cooking stuff. They stole stuff out of our food pantry. They stole all of these things. And I was, as you might imagine, unhappy. I was unhappy in that moment, and I was unhappy in general. And the next day, as other kind of church people came in and we were trying to figure out what to do with the door and, and all of that kind of stuff, one of my church leaders came in. He's like, well, you know what you need to remember, Pastor? I'm like, what? It's like, there's a special place in hell for people who steal from churches. And that made me feel a little better for a minute, I will tell you. Sorry about the colorful language, but this is church, all right? And as we were sitting there trying to figure it out, one of the other gals came down, and this was one of the amazing women. But she would serve the meals, and she had been around for a long time, and she had seen a lot of stuff, right? And if something wasn't the way that she thought it would be, she was definitely one of those people who would tell you. And it didn't matter if you were the pastor or the custodian or the president of the United States. If things weren't the way she wanted it to be, she would make sure that you knew it, right? We might know these people, right? And so when I saw her come in, I was like, oh man, I'm already tired. I've been up for a while. We're dealing with all this stuff. Like, I don't know that I want to deal with this right now. But unfortunately, one of the things you learn very, very quickly as a pastor is you don't get to pick your parishioners. You all come with the job. And so she came in and she took a little look around and she took a tour of what was going on, and she made a list of a few things that she noticed were missing that we hadn't noticed before, so we could at least try to submit things to insurance. And that's what we were doing at the time. So she comes over and she hands me her list, and she's like, this is everything I see that's gone. Some of that needs to be replaced soon. I'm like, okay. Name redacted. Like, I appreciate that. And she's like, well, and this whole thing, I just got to tell you, Pastor. I'm like, huh? And I'm girding. Like, we must be doing something really right for the devil to mess with us like this. And I was like, all right. I have never in my life forgotten that passage. I have never in my life forgotten that moment or that woman sitting at me telling me that. And I have repeated that statement when other things have befallen my churches in the past. That's not common, by the way. But when I have remembered that moment, I've actually shared it before. And while there's some interesting theological implications there that we should probably unpack at some other time, that was her attitude to it in the moment. This was not confirmation of us somehow being a victim. This was confirmation that we are doing something right and good. That we are not only helping build out God's kingdom, we are doing it in such a way that others, including those who maybe we'd prefer not, had taken notice. And it turned out, what I figured out over the couple of years I was there, is while she was definitely the kind of woman who would tell you what was up, once things got resolved or once she felt like she had her say, it would never come up again. And that was part of what she was doing. And she actually explained this to me once. She's like, because she actually asked me, are you bothered when I tell you these things? I'm like, no, but I'm always curious as to why. And she's like, well, I will tell you. And if it's something you can do something about, I trust you will do it. And then I don't have to carry it anymore, and I don't have to worry about it because I did what I could, which is to let the person know who could do something about it. She's like, and once she said that, I realized she was never one to pester. She was never one to come back. She was never one to say, oh, you didn't deal with this thing the way that I wanted it dealt with. She just saw something that wasn't right in the world or wasn't right in her world. She wanted to do what she could, and sometimes all that she could do was let somebody know, and then she let it go. And when I got to know her a little bit more, I recognized she really wasn't actually all that grumpy. That wasn't all that grumpy a person as I originally assumed her to be. And in fact, she was quite happy most of the time. And she did not find herself carrying many burdens. There are days I wish I could be more like her. I wish I could look at things that aren't the way that I want them to be in my life or the life of the world, or life of the church or life of our community or whatever it is. I wish I could look at it and go, this isn't correct. What can I do? Let me do that thing, and then let me not worry about it. I think Jesus could do that. I think she could do that. I can't do that. I like to carry things around. I like to stay annoyed for a little while. I like to say gruffy things under my breath. So I am one that needs to practice forgiveness. I am one that needs, especially when things happen to me, needs to practice it in a way. And I think sometimes when we talk about forgiveness, we think that forgiveness is simply just one thing or something that we can do or we can just manifest, right? Like, I'm going to forgive this person. I'm going to sit here and think about it and shake until I've done it. Usually, that does not work. Like most things in life, in order to help improve the situation we are in, it is a process. So I want to take a little bit of time this morning and talk through something that I think is a good understanding of a process for forgiveness. Now, One thing I need to clarify at the beginning here, as we've been going through this, we've been asking you to kind of rate yourself on all these different traits. And the analogy I used in the beginning was the idea of role-playing games, right, where you make up your character and those characters have different strengths and different weaknesses and different attributes. One of the places that analogy breaks down is when you are playing those role-playing games. Once you have set your traits, they do not tend to change. And it is usually not possible or very, very difficult to change them. That is not true for us. With practice, we can actually improve in many of the places that we have talked about. So if you are today, find yourself feeling like, I'm not really all that good at forgiveness, or I'm not good at some of these other things, that's okay. And not every strength is for every person for sure. But forgiveness, I think, is one of those things that to at least some degree we are all called to be competent in. We may never reach the stage of enlightenment that Jesus had about it, but I do think this is a place where we are all called to do the best we can. And if we recognize in ourselves that we are not there yet, then we have to recognize that forgiveness is a muscle. And if forgiveness is a muscle that will get strengthened the more that we practice it. But in order to strengthen it, you have to practice it. In order to practice it, you have to know how. So I'm going to give you, I'm going to walk through a little bit this morning, a framework, a way, some steps you can see how you might be able to help practice forgiveness yourselves. The first thing you have to do is you have to acknowledge. If we need to forgive, it's usually because we've been hurt, right? It's something has happened. We've either something or someone has done something to us, or something we've done to ourselves, or whatever it is, something in our lives has hurt us, either emotionally or physically or whatever it is. That first thing we have to do is acknowledge that that is true, that we have in fact been hurt by someone or the world or something. So at this time, I'm going to invite you to take a moment as we move through this and think of a place or think of a time where maybe you've been hurt. And maybe a place or a time or a situation where you've been hurt where maybe all of the forgiveness has not been done. Instead of giving you an illustration as we walk through this, I want you each to give your own. So think about that person you have yet to reconcile with, that person that still annoys you every time you see them, that situation that if you think about maybe still causes you a little pain or anxiety. Think about those places as we move through. And first and foremost, give yourself permission to acknowledge that you have been hurt. I think sometimes this is the biggest barrier we have because we sometimes assume that acknowledge the fact that we were hurt somehow means also acknowledging our own weakness, right? That we were allowed to be hurt, that we allowed something to happen, that we allowed ourselves to be hurt or whatever it is. Well, let me tell you what, most of the time when things happen in our lives we don't want, it's not a matter of what we have allowed or didn't allow to happen. Whether we like it or not, a lot of the world and what everybody else in the world does isn't really in our control. And sometimes if we are going to move through life, well, actually all the time, if we're going to move through life and be around people and be in community and be in the world, there are times and situations where we are going to get or feel hurt. It comes with the territory. It's part of being alive. So first we have to give ourselves permission to acknowledge that yes, something, someone, somehow hurt us, even if that thing that hurt us is ourselves or someone we care about. The next thing we do is we talk about making a commitment. We acknowledge that the hurt is there, and then we make a commitment to ourselves to do something about it. It is very difficult and not likely if we just ignore the hurt that it will go away on its own. If it's something small, maybe. I'm really good at sort of actually forgetting the small stuff over time. I think that's probably because I'm going to end up with like Alzheimer's or dementia someday, and my brain just doesn't work all that well. But the smaller stuff sometimes does go away. That is true. But a lot doesn't. And a lot, if we don't acknowledge it and don't commit to work on it, actually does the opposite of go away, is it starts to grow and it starts to fester. We've all experienced this. Because then we take the big hurt that we feel, and then we take all the little hurts that we feel subsequently, and we layer it on that big hurt, right? And the ball just grows. So we have to make a commitment to say, acknowledge the hurt, and then we have to make a commitment that we're actually going to try to do something about it. And the best way to make a commitment about something is to tell somebody else about it. This is why we have friends. This is why we have partners. This is why we have communities. This is why we have small groups. This is why we have people in our lives that we love and care about. A lot of times things really aren't real until we share them with someone else. So we all need to have those people in our lives that we know and we love and we trust that we can go to say, hey, I don't need you to do anything about this, but I need you to know, I need to say out loud, I was hurt in this way, and I want to try to do something about it. Now, don't ask me how I'm doing because I don't want that. Or maybe, if you want some accountability, that's not bad. But it's important that something happens when we say things out loud, and something happens when we say things out loud to other people. Something actually even happens when we say things out loud to ourselves in the mirror. There is just something about making the sounds with our voice that makes thoughts real in a way that they otherwise are not. So the ability of making a commitment to say, I'm going to do this, and to say that out loud, and at best say it to somebody else, is a very important step to get started. Otherwise, everything else is a lot harder. The next thing you have to recognize is why you are practicing forgiveness. We practice forgiveness for us. If it is a person we need to forgive, they may never know that they even hurt us. They may never know that they needed forgiveness. They may never know that you are offering or you are trying to forgive them. Sometimes they will, and sometimes that's appropriate, and sometimes it's not. Because sometimes engaging with that person or that situation does nothing but open yourselves up to more hurt. Some relationships or some people or some systems are so unhealthy you're better off just avoiding them. But that does not mean you do not find a way to forgive them. So you recognize that at the end of the day, forgiveness is for us. It's for us to put down our burdens. It's for us to make sure that we don't have to carry more than we are carrying. It is for us to help experience the grace and love and peace that God has for us. So we recognize next, after we've acknowledged and committed and we recognize that what we're doing is actually for us and that is an okay thing, we are allowed to do things for us. We are allowed to care about ourselves. We are allowed to do things that make our lives easier and our burdens less. God expects us to do this. God wants us to do this. So we recognize that that's what's going on. And then we claim. We again claim the hurt and claim that it is real. That what we are feeling is real, and we give ourselves permission to feel it. This is more than just acknowledging it at the beginning. At the beginning, we acknowledge that something happens, and something happened, and we acknowledge to work on the something. Now we claim that there is hurt, and the hurt is real. And then next, we are called to practice. We practice by doing the things that lets us not ignore the hurt, but engage with it in a healthy way. It's when the hurt comes to us, that situation comes to us, when the thoughts come to us, we don't immediately push them down. We take the opportunity to maybe go to God in prayer. We take the opportunity to perhaps meditate on it. We take the opportunity to find a quiet place, to really think through it. We engage and we practice those things that bring us life. We practice those things that help us get through. The practice part is really important because once we've acknowledged the hurt, our default thing is to try to not think about it anymore. But unfortunately, if we're going to move past, we're going to get to the forgiveness, you have to do this. And so we find those practices that help us through, and what we should notice and what we will notice is that when we do that, the next time it comes up, it gets a little easier. And the next time it comes up after that, it gets a little easier. And with each time that we practice actually moving through it instead of running away from it, we are shedding some of the burden of it. This is an active thing. Forgiveness is an activity. It is something we actively do and participate in. It's not something that you can really do in the background or on autopilot. Finally, our last two, we understand that we have to take responsibility. We claim that this really is our job and it really is our thing to do. It's not fair that we have to do it. It is often not fair that we were hurt. It is not fair that things that we didn't want to happen happened. It's not fair that bad things happened. None of this was fair, and that is absolutely true. And it is still our responsibility to deal with it. And then finally, We know when forgiveness has happened, when we've gone through the steps, when we're able to, the end of the day, amend the story. This is not about forgetting. Forgiveness is not forgetting, and it's never been, right? Sometimes it will, the memory will fade, and that's fine. But it's not about pretending something didn't happen. And it isn't about trying to pretend like the situation was something other than it was. It is about amending the story. It is about adding a new ending, and a new ending whereby, through this process of forgiveness, through dealing with it, through doing the hard steps and putting in the hard work, we recognize that throughout all that hard work, that God was with us, that God was working, and that we are a different person at the end of the journey of forgiveness than at the beginning. And the person we are at the end of the journey of forgiveness is probably, and no doubt is, a better, stronger, healthier person than the one at the beginning. It doesn't make what happened okay. The fact that good comes out of bad situations does not mean the situation wasn't bad. So we can acknowledge both those things. We can acknowledge that the thing was bad, the hurt was real, and because we claimed it and we did the hard work and we let God work through us, we are able, through God's help, to actually make something good come out of it. And when we amend our story and we say, oh, that thing that happened, the story doesn't end at the hurt. The story ends at the forgiveness. The story doesn't end with the burden. The story ends with me putting the burden down. And then that story is the one that becomes profound, and that is the one that will not only change our lives, but inspire others. Now, I believe that you can see this entire process fully articulated in the life of Christ. Because what is it that we know that God came to do through Christ, right? What did God come to offer through Christ for us? Forgiveness. We talk about it all the time, right? God, through Christ, forgives us of those things we cannot forgive ourselves of. God takes on some of the process that we have to go through for us, right? Not so we don't have to do it ourselves ever, but he does it for the hardest stuff so that we can do it for everything else. And we can see it in the life of Christ. First off, Jesus comes and acknowledges that the world is broken, right? Right at the beginning, we recognize at the beginning of Jesus' ministry and Jesus' life that the world is not how it's supposed to be. It's true now, and it was definitely true 2,000 years ago. So Jesus doesn't shy away from the fact that there is brokenness in the world and there is healing and health and forgiveness that needs to happen. In fact, he claims it. And then he commits to his role of being a part of that work. When he is baptized by John, John says, no, I shouldn't, you don't need to be baptized. You're the Son of God. Why are we doing this? Well, Jesus does it so that he can make that commitment in front of himself and everybody that he is going to be part of the work of health and healing and forgiveness that God wants him to be. And then we have to recognize, and then Jesus recognizes who he's doing the work for. In much way, we have to recognize we are doing the work for us. Jesus recognized and claims over and over and over again what he's doing is actually not for him, but it's for us also. This is what we say when Jesus takes on part of the burden of forgiveness. He reminds us of who forgiveness is for. It's for us. Our forgiveness is for us. When we offer forgiveness to ourselves and others, it's for us. And when Jesus offers forgiveness, it's for us too. Jesus also claims the hurt. He does not shy away from pointing out the places in the world where people have been hurt when he sticks up for the orphans and the widows and the poor and the people who have been oppressed. When he doesn't shy away from those places where things and hurt is happening and instead shines a light on it, he is claiming the hurt. And then, of course, Jesus practices all the time, right? He teaches, he preaches, he heals, he feeds. Over and over and over and over again, he does things that not only bring out the hurt, but also do what he can to alleviate it and help people move through it. And finally, or not quite finally, Jesus takes responsibility, though he's taking responsibility for something that actually is not his. He takes responsibility in the passage we have today. When we talk about Jesus going to the cross, and admittedly, I know we don't really like to talk about it because it makes us uneasy, and that's understandable. But what Jesus is doing is he's taking responsibility for what he can do. In fact, what only he can do. And if you notice, the thief that ends up being forgiven next to Jesus by him at the cross is the thief that takes responsibility for what they have done. And then finally, and in fact, most importantly, the reason that we continue to be here today and tell the stories that we tell is that Jesus amends the story. The passage today is not where it ends. It does not end at the cross. Jesus' story continues, and most importantly, goes next to the empty tomb. We are people of Easter. We have always lived on this side of Easter. Our tomb has always been empty. We remember those times and we tell the stories so we do not forget. But the tomb that we have and the tomb that we lived has always been empty. We live on this side. That is our story, and we are blessed with the whole and complete one. We know the whole path through, and we know how important it was, in fact, how critical it was, how crucial it was, that Jesus amended the story at the end and gave us what we needed. The empty tomb that leads to new life, better life, the life that we are all called to and invited to live in today. That is the path of forgiveness as we are called to practice. That is the path of forgiveness that Jesus practiced on our behalf. That is the practice of forgiveness that we are all now called to practice today, so that we can truly be Easter people. We can truly be the people of life. We can truly be the people of resurrection who are living in that resurrection today. Now, sometimes I admit we don't like talking about things like the brokenness of the world, right? That is actually language that sometimes makes people uncomfortable. What I think we're having at that point, though, is a little bit of debate about semantics. We're having the half-full conversation, right? Because we can talk about the brokenness of the world. We can also talk about the potential of the world, right? On one hand, we can talk about the brokenness the world is not, and our own lives, the brokenness of our own lives, which is basically saying we are not everything that we ought to be or could be, which means that we have the potential to become more. So choose to see it how you want to see it, however that is helpful for you. Either way, whether you want to call the glass half empty or glass is half full, at the end of the day, it doesn't actually matter. What matters is to recognize there's still room in the glass. There is still room in us. There is still room in our lives. There's still space for more. There's space for more love. There's space for more care. There's space for more Jesus. We all are blessed in that way. So yes, we recognize the world is not as we want to be. Use the language that you want. We either have, we have some brokenness to deal with, or we have potential to live into. The language honestly does not matter. What matters is the recognition that each and every one of us has room in our glass and rooms in our lives. Now, finally, I want to talk about this. Sometimes the person that we need to forgive is ourselves. Sometimes the one that messed things up for us is us. We didn't do the thing we know we should have done, or we did do the thing we shouldn't have done. Maybe the moment we knew it, and maybe the moment we didn't. The process and the invitation is the same. God no more wants or expects us to carry around the burden of our own lack of forgiveness for ourselves than he wants us to carry it around for our lack of forgiveness of our neighbor. So we can, and we are invited to acknowledge that we have not been perfect, that we've messed up, that we have done or not done things we ought to do, and that we are invited to walk through those steps that bring us to a place where we can both admit that it happened, but also lay down the burden of it. That we can both not run away from the fact that we are not perfect, because I know most of you, and you're not. I like you. I'm not either. We can acknowledge that, but also find a place where we can set down the baggage from it that allows us to amend our own story. Where we can amend our story so that we no longer define ourselves so much by our faults and our frailties and where we've messed up, but we define ourselves by the more important thing, which of course is our status as one of God's beloved children, one of the people that was worthy of God's love and grace, one of the people that was forgiven at the cross, and be one of those people whose glass is worthy to be filled up a little bit more. That is why we come to this table every month, where we come to receive the bread and the cup, to receive the grace that we have not earned or but have been offered, to literally taste and touch the forgiveness that God has for us. So, how do you feel you are doing in this idea of forgiveness? If it is something that comes easy for you, fantastic, wonderful. Claim that for yourself, because by claiming it, it is a reminder to live into it, right? In the same way that we have that commit step where we commit the fact of the idea, we verbalize, yes, I've been hurt. That helps us move forward in the process. When we claim our strengths, it reminds us that we are called to live into them. So if you find yourself as one of those who feels like forgiveness is something you do well, or maybe comes easier to others, then great. If you are like me and recognize that there maybe is work to do, maybe you're maybe a little better than most, but not quite there yet, that's fine too. But this is one of those places where we can practice the muscle and we can get better. So as we prepare to receive communion this morning, I do invite you in all the ways that you know how to do. There's a little one-question poll to talk through. How are we doing on unforgiveness? How do you think you are? Was it a struggle for you to think of somebody or something you needed to forgive? That's a good thing, because I guarantee you somebody at some point hurt you. And if you are not carrying that, then that is great. If you are shuffling through about 10 different people that you've got grudges with right now, maybe the forgiveness muscle is something we need to work on. Either way, we recognize that we follow in the path of the one that showed us what is possible, and that in fact already did everything we needed to be done, that already gave us the way to move through forgiveness and to help us have the forgiveness that we all need. The grace and peace is ours. All we have to do is claim. Amen.